Breaking news to start with here on Weekend Edition. We'll take you live to the White House for more reaction on yesterday's findings into classified documents found at Joe Biden's house. Let's go there now.
Policy and practice. That's them saying it. We agree. You know, you heard the president speak forcefully about this last night. You heard the vice president speak forcefully about this today. We certainly agree that it's gratuitous. But I explained this a little bit in the opening. You know, we're in a very pressurized political environment. And when you are the first special counsel in history not to indict anybody, there is pressure to criticize and to make, you know, statements that maybe in otherwise you wouldn't make. And, you know, I think that it leaves you wondering why some of these critiques are in there. But I think it's also important to just fundamentally distinguish between the prior case that you mentioned. I want to be careful in terms of commenting on that. But the special counsel report goes into great detail about the differences and distinctions there. And I think it's important to understand that the criticisms that you're hearing of the gratuitous comments in the report, which are wrong, frankly, you know, this is being shared by people who have deep experience at the Justice Department.
On the many issues related to memory that certainly seem to prompt an angry response from the president and from his advocates, is there anything being done to address that issue in an ongoing way? Obviously, Counsel wrote asking for some of those things to be removed. It is potential that Robert Hur could be called before Congress to testify in public. Are there any steps that the administration would take addressing that specific issue? Is it in relation to overall medical physician's report of the president or other things to demonstrate what is the issue with memory, and is it a factor that deals with his capacity to serve?
Well, I have a lot of issues with the contents of that question, and Kareen's answered a lot about the president's transparency in his medical records and his physical and things of that nature. And I, you know, leave that to Kareen to handle. But I'll say, I just read you this. Page 248, or sorry, excuse me. Later in the report, he says, quote, "We expect the evidence of Mr. Biden's state of mind to be compelling," pointing to him providing, quote, "clear and, quote, forceful testimony." I can't explain why the report veers all over the place on this issue. I can just say, and as you've heard from the vice president, you heard from members of Congress yesterday talking about their recent interactions with the president. One, Congressman Goldman from New York, talking about his interaction with the president the day before this interview, when Congressman Goldman was on the ground in Israel, and the long and intensive and detailed conversation they had about what was going on the ground. We just reject that this is true. And I think that it does raise questions about the gratuitousness, and it raises, you know, makes you wonder why that's in there.
Thank you, Kareen, and thank you, Ian. So you are discrediting some of the findings in this report. You are discrediting some of the observations of President Biden. So why should the American public accept the conclusion that charges weren't warranted?
I'm not sure I understand exactly what you're asking.
I'm saying you're claiming that much of the report is inaccurate. So why are you so confident that the conclusion is correct?
The conclusion has been obvious from the very beginning. It was a long, intensive, sort of meandering investigation that came to the conclusion that in February of last year, everybody knew that this wasn't intentional, that this was an accident, that they were found, and as soon as they were found, the president said, give them back, get them back as soon as we can, and fully cooperate with everything. So he reached the inevitable conclusion because it's the truth. The conduct of the investigation throughout and the gratuitous comments in the report are troubling, and they're inappropriate. But I think that the finding was the obvious one because it's the truth.
President Biden blamed his staff largely for the mishandling of documents and where they ultimately ended up. Does the president believe he did everything right when it comes to handling classified material?
Well, just look at look at the report. I know it's long, but the report talks about how the evidence is that these were most likely things that were packed up by staff during movements and transitions and things of that nature. So that's reflected by the report. It's not some accusation by the president. It's just true. I mean, you guys know, you guys work with White House staff all the time. We support the principal. That's our job. And the principal relies on their staff to help them with things. And the president said this last night. You know, he talked about how, you know, looking back, if he had been more, he wished to be more engaged in that process of the packing and the moving things to make sure that things were being done the right way. And I think the most important thing to remember is once it was realized that something wrong had happened, he did everything right to get it back and to fix the problem.
What about all the stuff that he talked about that was in his home, in filing cabinets that were either locked or able to be locked in his house? What stuff was he talking about? Classified materials?
Well, we talked about, I mean, the report goes on at length about this. I'd encourage you to read it. It talks about
what he said last night. He said the stuff in my house was all in filing cabinets that were either locked or able to be locked. Didn't he put them in his home?
I'm not really following the question. I think that what's clear is that, and I told this to Justin a minute ago, he has personal diaries that he had. Of course he has his personal diaries. The documents that were taken were jumbled up in boxes and found inadvertently in places, and that's what happened. So.
We gotta move on.
Yeah, thank you. How concerned is the president and the team here that the, quote, gratuitous comments are going to damage him, damage public perception of him?
I think the public is smart, and I think that they can see what's going on. I think that they see a president who fully cooperated. I think they see a president who did the right thing and made sure everything got back. And I think that they see that this was a long investigation that ended without a case to be made. And, I think that they can see and understand, when people are gratuitous and make comments that they shouldn't make and that are beyond the remit of a prosecutor to do. I think that they understand that. And I think that they'll understand that the president did the right thing here.
The 7th and 8th were obviously, or 8th and 9th were obviously like very busy days where the president was overstretched, taking calls in the middle of the night, all of this. Why continue with the interview with her? Why not do it on another day? Why give him the opportunity to have these lines in the report about lapses, about timelines?
He should have thrown up roadblocks. Is that what you're saying? I mean, no, he committed to it. And as
Special Counsel, like, hey, the world is on fire. Could we do it another day?
I'll tell you what's interesting about this, and this is oddly not in the report, is at the beginning of his interview, the special counsel told the president, I understand that you're dealing with a lot of things right now, and I'm going to be asking you questions about stuff from a long time ago. I want you to try to recall to the best of your abilities, things of that nature. That's often what prosecutors would tell witnesses. So, he understood that. But the president was going to commit to being cooperative. He talked about this last night. He wanted to make sure he had everything he needed, and he didn't want to throw up roadblocks.
We gotta move on. Good.
Thanks, Shereen. Just a first question. Has the president read the entire report, and when was he given the report? Did he review it when his lawyers did the privilege review? And do you have any just context on when he himself found the findings of it?
We received the report yesterday from the Justice Department and formally sending it over. Obviously, the president's lawyers were doing the privilege review that we disclosed to everybody was happening and disclosed when we had concluded it. And so I think they had briefed him on the material as the client, as is typical in a legal case. And then we received the full report yesterday. The president's been pretty busy. I'm not sure he's read 400 pages. I'm not sure how many folks in this room have read all 400 pages of it, but he certainly is familiar with the contents of the report.
Just one quick follow-up. The president was adamant.
We'll leave that there, but of course we'll have plenty more on that subject throughout the course of the morning. We'll cross to the United States shortly here on Weekend Edition.